Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tipped. Today we're talking about the fantasy implications of the 2021 schedule. Before we get into it guys, please leave a like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I would really appreciate the support. Without further ado now, let's jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about are teams that play on off nights. So basically what I wanted to do was look at off nights and see what teams played the most on off nights. In the past, these off nights would usually be on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. So usually you could just see which teams play the most on those days. This year, the schedule seems a little bit different, and sometimes the off days were on a Tuesday or on a Thursday, which is a little bit strange. So what I did was I went and I listed all the days in which there are 6 games played or less. So 12 teams playing or less. And I went and saw which teams play the most on those days where not a lot of teams play. The results that I got were that the Vancouver Canucks and the LA Kings play 22 times on these off days. The Vegas Golden Knights and the Boston Bruins play 21 times on these off days. Philadelphia Flyers and the Toronto Maple Leafs play 19 times on these off days. And the Anaheim Ducks, the Edmonton Oilers, the Montreal Canadiens, and the San Jose Sharks play 18 times on these off days. Now, you can take this information in a few ways, right? One way I like to look at it is if you only have room for 2 centers in your pool, suddenly you can take a third center and be able to slot it into your lineup if you do it properly. For example, if you take Elias Pettersson really early in the draft as a locked-in center, you might be able to take 2 other centers as well, because Elias Pettersson plays a lot on off days, so he won't conflict that much with the other 2 centers that you're probably going to end up taking in your draft. If you end up taking Elias Pettersson and Patrice Bergeron, they both play on a lot of off days, so it's even more likely that the third centerman that you pick is not going to conflict very much with those 2 guys who are locked in as center. That's just one way of looking at it. This works obviously with other positions too, not just center. I particularly like looking at this for goaltenders because I really like to be able to play 3 goalies in leagues when there's only 2 goalie starting spots. Unfortunately, Vancouver, LA, Vegas, and Boston, none of them really have like an easy number 1 goalie that's going to get the vast majority of the starts. That's not going to happen. So no, I don't necessarily recommend reaching for any of these teams' goaltenders, but Carter Hart, Frederik Andersen, John Gibson, Mikko Koskinen, Carey Price might be some pretty good options considering that they will play a lot on these off days, which should allow you some flexibility to have 2 other goalies in your lineup. One more thing to note with this, guys, is that there are 4 teams that almost never play on off days. These teams are Dallas with only 5 off days, Columbus with only 6 off days, Carolina with only 7 off days, and Nashville with only 8. All this means, guys, is that if you draft players from these teams, that your schedule will not necessarily be as flexible as it would if you drafted players from other teams. And that's not necessarily to discourage you from drafting players from these teams, but if there is a similar caliber player from a team that's got a little bit more off-night games, it might be worth grabbing that other player over one of these teams' players. Alright guys, so the second and final thing I wanted to talk about in this video is the breakdown of back-to-back games by team. Which teams have more back-to-backs and which teams have less. The teams with less back-to-backs might have a chance to play their goalie a lot more than teams that have a lot of back-to-backs. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So this season there's only one team that has 12 back-to-backs, which is a lot considering that the schedule is only 56 games, and that's the San Jose Sharks. And with San Jose, we don't really know who's going to be their starter anyway. Is it going to be Martin Jones or is it going to be Devin Dubnyk? It'll probably end up being a 50-50 split, so the number of back-to-backs doesn't really matter anyway since the goalies should be splitting the games. Next, there's 2 teams with 11 back-to-backs, and those are Ottawa and Edmonton, which means Matt Murray should be getting a significant amount of breaks to Marcus Hogberg. Same with Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith. Mike Smith will be getting a lot more starts than we necessarily want Mike Smith to get. Next, there are 7 teams with 10 back-to-back games this year. And those are Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, Nashville, Carolina, St. Louis, and LA. These teams also will have to play their backup a fair amount. Montreal will have to play Jake Allen a little bit more. Toronto will have to play Jack Campbell a little bit more. Carolina will have to play James Reimer a little bit more, and so on. Next, there are 4 teams with 9 back-to-back games, and those teams are Winnipeg, Minnesota, Arizona, Anaheim. Now, any team with less than 9 back-to-back games is a pretty good team. So all the teams I'm going to list now are pretty good in terms of goaltender schedule. There are 8 teams with 8 back-to-backs. Columbus, Detroit, Boston, Buffalo, New York Islanders, Philadelphia, Vegas, Washington. There are 6 teams with only 7 back-to-backs. Those teams are Vancouver, Florida, Chicago, Dallas, New Jersey, and Colorado. So in theory, if Bobrovsky is having a really good season, he could really see the vast majority of the starts. And then there are 3 teams with only 6 back-to-backs. Those teams are Tampa Bay, New York Rangers, and Pittsburgh. So if Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, and Jari look really sharp this year, they could get almost every single start for their team, which makes them incredibly valuable goaltenders. Go ahead and draft Vasilevsky in that first round. Don't be scared. Draft Jari easy in that 4th round. Do not hesitate. And Shesterkin should be a pretty great pick as well. Alright, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. I really appreciate it. Please leave a like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave a comment, let me know how I can improve these videos. Until next time, guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.